like for probably 3 or 4, 5 years, I lived on ibuprofen and paracetamol every day. Again, I thought that was normal. Where I started realizing there was a problem was I developed crazy pain in my hands, right? Like really like unbelievable pain. So I went and seen the doctor, and he sat me down and he's like, look, the way you live your life and the way that you think is not normal. Your ability to handle stress is not normal. And he said, you're probably 24 to 48 hours away from a full mental breakdown that you will never recover from. And unless you make some serious changes to your life now, you ain't gonna survive this.
Welcome to Every Moment is a Choice. I'm your host, Erica Behel. I invite you to join me as we delve into the lives of inspiring and diverse individuals who navigate life with intention. Living with purpose starts with embracing the power you have in every moment. If you enjoy this episode, don't forget to subscribe. So, hello everyone. Today I am so honored to have Rich Wilson on the podcast today. Hi, Rich.
Hello, Erica. Thanks for having me.
So for the listeners, Rich Wilson is co-founder and CEO of Gigged.ai, the platform that is helping FTSE 100 companies navigate the tech talent shortage through their internal and open talent platforms. Prior to founding Gigged.ai, Rich spent 12 years in senior leadership positions at prominent U.S. staffing firm Allegis Group and 3 years working with Gartner, where he worked with CIOs, CTOs, and CDOs. I'm guessing that's Chief Data Officer.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. On how to navigate digital transformation and the future of work. Rich is a thought leader in digital transformation and future of work and has contributed to articles with Forbes, Raconteur, and the FT, the good old Financial Times. So Rich was also a board member with the Data Lab, advising on how to solve the skill shortage of data scientists. And Rich is also the host of startup podcast First Time Founder. I'm so excited to get into this.
Thank you. No, thanks for having me. That's quite a big, that was nearly my CV in one.
And Rich, where are you from?
So I'm from a little town just outside Glasgow, in Scotland called Lanark. Like I said, I spent a lot of my time in the US, 15 years working with large US firms. So a lot of time in America, but yeah, I'm really a Glasgow boy at heart.
Nice. And we've actually met. I don't know if we met over email. We met in person one time. I
think it was during it was either before or just at COVID. I think we'd done a few video calls when I was at Gartner working with Wood Mac. Yeah.
Yeah. So with my former company, it was a Scottish-based company, and we worked with Gartner. So I got to know Rich a little bit through that contact. But you've done so much since, so there's so much to cover here.
Yeah, definitely busy. Gartner was quite a big change, and then decided kind of Gartner, I suppose, inspired me. Spent a lot of time working with a lot of very senior leadership. Spent a lot of time reading a lot of research, seeing what the future is going to hold. And, I thought, you know what, maybe I could lean into some of that and try and make some of it happen. So, that's what I decided to do.
Yeah. It's fascinating stuff. I mean, the future of work is a massive topic, okay? So let's just get right into it because I'm really interested about your company. So you're building a company right now that kind of straddles the intersection of AI and human talent. Yeah. So tell us a bit more about Gigged.ai.
Yeah, so in its purest form, it's a talent platform. So it's a way for senior leaders, mainly in tech, to be able to tap into different talent pools. So I was in recruitment for 12 years, mainly contingent talent. Part of the reason I left, or the 100% reason I left, was I suffer from serious burnout, like really, really bad mental health challenges. 12 years in that industry. Great company, it's a great industry, but it is very, very difficult industry. And that did take its toll on me. after 12 years. Didn't see it coming, hit me like a train, didn't see it coming. And that allowed me to take some time out. That's how I ended up then took some time out, was then joined Gartner, which I stayed for 3 years. It was meant to be a 2-year gig, but I stayed for nearly 3 years. And I was able to look at a lot of the trends. And obviously that was during COVID. And obviously remote work was growing, but also people's behaviour to how they wanted to work was changing. There's a stat, 56% of Gen Zs now go freelance before they take a permanent job as their full-time job now. You also have the other side of the career expansion. You had a lot of people over 50 who decided that they didn't want to be in the permanent career rat race anymore, and they wanted to go and do something different. So there's been a huge rise in fractional careers, side hustling, whatever you want to call it. But over the next kind of 5-10 years, how we work is going to continue to change. And, companies need to look at different ways that they can tap into that changing talent pool. I think the days of just hiring a full-time employee that would stay for 4 to 5 years, or a contractor that you would have for 12 to 18 months, there's so many other options now. And there's so many other different ways to tap into great people from all over the world. But you need to have a very open mind to how you engage that person. It can't be a full-time contract, a fixed-term contract, or just a contractor engagement. There are so many other ways to do it. So, and this is something I kept seeing and hearing firsthand at Gartner. And there was a lot of great platforms that were being reviewed by Gartner. However, they were all very disparate platforms, and there wasn't one that could do both the internal. So, hey, what talent do I have internally in my workforce that may have the skills I need, but is looking for an opportunity? Only 5% of companies are at the moment look internally before they go externally. At a time of cost cutting and layoffs, that doesn't really make any sense. But then obviously you've got a growing, what we call open talent pool. And that can be, I said, side hustlers, that can be people, fractional consultants, that can be boutique consultancies. There's a lot of different talent pools there now all over the world that you can tap into. So we thought, why don't we try and do both? Which in hindsight was particularly ambitious. Some would say stupid. So we decided to start to try and build 2 technology platforms at once that helped, and they can be used together. The current behavior is they're used standalone. And we decided, hey, let's go after big companies and let's try and solve that challenge. Again, very ambitious, very, and trying to do it from Scotland is difficult as well. But it's also got there's huge positives as well. The workforce really we can tap into. So yeah, we decided to start trying to solve that problem, and we took it from really a blank piece of paper in July. So I left Gartner in July 2021, really with a blank bit of paper, and we thought, right, let's try and do this, and that was a journey we've been on for the last 2.5 years. But one of the big positives we're seeing, and it's very difficult at first, especially trying to build technology product, because that's what we are. We are trying to be a technology company that helps companies tap into talent. We're not trying to be a recruitment firm or any sort of recruitment company. It is very much a technology company, which is obviously very expensive and very difficult to build. But we are seeing much more demand because, again, it goes back to, and a lot of it goes back to people's mental health, is that people want to change how they work, right? I said, now, if you said to me, you need to go back into an office 5 days a week with a big corporate, work 50 hours a week, in a cubicle, there's no amount of money that you could do now to get me to do that. I just couldn't, I wouldn't do it. And I think a lot of people have that, COVID was definitely a bit of an awakening for me. I was lucky that Gartner had a very open approach to that. Gartner was a remote company way before COVID. So I had already tasted how efficient a remote first company could be, and how effective it could be if it was done correctly. So I'd already felt that, you know, it wasn't a big thing for us when COVID came. It was just kind of BAU. And that's why they grew, you know, so much over COVID.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's what I thought. Can we try and facilitate that? Can we try and lean into the changing behaviours? And I think one of the other things, I think we'll start to see companies very much change how they view their talent, you know, in terms of, you know, talent sharing, secondments. You know, you can have talent and you could actually let it go out to other companies to learn new skills. You know, I think that whole, you know, workforce that we would have came into of you go in, you work your tail off, you get promoted, you go again, get the
Yeah.
next promotion, and then you move to the next bigger company for a little bit more, and then you keep going until you get to the top. And that's what I'd done until I just broke. And then that's when I started thinking, well, why am I trying to get to the top of a ladder that I don't really want to be at the top of the ladder anyway? So why am I trying to climb up this ladder so quickly?
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are realizing that, you know, it's not so much a ladder. There's different chapters now, right? And there's different ways to do it. And you can that whole traditional career model, which has been going since the 1930s, 1940s, is really not fit for purpose anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so fascinating because you brought up a few points there on the way that kind of freelance work, the attitude from workers about freelance work is changing. Because I remember probably pre-COVID, like freelance work was what you did when you didn't have a full-time job, because people were seeking, I mean, there's benefits to full-time. There's like the health insurance benefits and kind of the package you kind of get being in a full-time role. But how quickly this seems to have changed now that people are looking beyond a full-time, not just a full-time job, but kind of almost feeling tied to one company. Like people want a bit more freedom or a bit more like project-based stuff. Like it seems like a lot's changing.
Yeah. Well, I think COVID, I know it's the easy answer to say COVID was the accelerator, but I think for this kind of work it was.
Yeah.
If you think, we've never seen an employment bubble like it. If you think 2020, well, let's say March 2020, mass layoffs, right? Companies just like, right, what's happening here? We're going to cut our costs. We're going to cut. We don't know what's going on. Huge layoffs. It looked like the economy was going to trounce again, both the US and the UK. And then all of a sudden, we get to a stage 12 to 18 months later that we have overemployment. So we actually have nearly the highest rates of employment we've ever seen. But what we realise now, that was overzealousness and overhiring. And then what we've now realised now is a correction. But people who were impacted by COVID, a lot of people who moved out, like you look at London's a classic example. You look at people who lived in London who then moved to Cornwall and Devon and all these, a lot up to Scottish Islands. They just got out of it. So they then move, let's say you move to a Scottish island, Shetland, you're an exec in a city. And then after COVID, you're cool for 12 months. And then now you're getting a return to work mandate. And it's like, hey, you need to come back full-time to London. You're not going full-time to London. So you're going to try and get you're going to try and find a remote first job somewhere else. But what then a lot of people are doing, and this is the behavior change that we've seen a lot on our platform, 70% on that open talent, 70% of all the projects that get completed are by what we call a side hustler. And a side hustler is someone who is permanently employed somewhere, but they are dipping their toe in the market to try and start to build a fractional career. And that person that I mentioned in Shetland, they're not going to quit their job and go freelance. They're not going to do that. That's a big risk. But what they're going to do is they're going to sign up to a platform like us or an Upwork or a Catalan or, and they're going to try and start to get a gig. And they're going to try and do that in evenings and weekends. And then all of a sudden, they're going to get to a point where they go, you know what? I am going to then go and build a career, or not even a career. I'm going to go and build an income from being fractional. And, that can be a consultant, that can be a freelancer, it can be a contractor. There's lots of different, that whole freelancer word for me is a catch-all for a lot of different things. It doesn't Back in the day, you would think a freelancer is really a creative. You would really think about
Yeah.
creative industries. You wouldn't think about it for high tech. But now
Yeah.
it really is a catch-all. It's a term for someone who is not a full-time employee, but that can be a different way. And as I said, we're seeing a lot of really senior people, and then we're seeing people who are being made redundant. Maybe they've been made redundant, and I mean senior people, CTOs, CTOs that have been made redundant 2 or 3 times in the last 3 years. That's painful, right? That
Yeah.
emotionally has an impact. Being made redundant, again, it's just a balance sheet decision mostly, but that being made redundant does have an impact on your well-being. If you've been made redundant 2 or 3 times in a short period of time, you're going to start thinking maybe there's a different way to work. Maybe there's a different way for me to live, and maybe I don't take another full-time job at Google because I might just be let go in 12 months when they cut that department I was working in. So
Yeah.
I think all of these things that have been so condensed in the last 2 or 3 years is then leading to a change in behavior.
Yeah. It's so fascinating to me, the side hustle culture that's emerging, because even out here in Singapore, it's also a huge thing, and people view it almost as a way of taking back a little bit of autonomy, like you said, because you don't have this type of relationship with companies anymore that you trust that they're going to take care of you as long as you do your job, right? There's so many layoffs. People have just lost that trust, I think, and even larger in the Googles, the Metas, all these places that are having massive layoffs, even out here in Singapore. And people are viewing this as kind of I'm going to take back control by doing a side hustle, build it up to around 60-70% of my current full-time income, and then I have a lot of freedom,
Yeah, and it's an insurance policy, right?
Yeah.
It's an it's an insurance policy because think about LinkedIn. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, but you've never seen so many very high quality senior people being made redundant as regularly as we have recently. Like even this year alone,
Yeah.
like the and there's always like in the past there's been this, oh well, they've been made redundant because they're not very good. That's crap now, right? That's not why people have been made redundant. They're being made redundant because of the yo-yo effect to the economy and the fact that companies are often and this is how big companies work, right? It's not a new thing. They're reducing their OPEX budget. They're reducing their budgets.
Yeah.
During COVID, they reduced it and then expanded it, and now they're reducing it again because they're trying to keep their fixed costs very low. If you're keeping your fixed costs low, you still need to drive new projects, new products. You still need to do new things. So the money's still getting spent.
Yeah.
But it's getting spent over here in this other budget, which is usually that's where the fractional side comes in. And traditionally, the fractional side has always been a day rate contractor that would be on site for 12 to 18 months. But because of the regulations, especially in the US and the UK, that's not as easy to do anymore. And it's not, it's disguised employment. But if you work as a side hustler on an outcome and you work on not on hours work, but on what the outcome is that you're trying to achieve, then that could be done as a side hustle. And that's really the big behavior change that we're trying to change with companies. The talent behavior change is easy, right? We always say the talent bit is not the part where we have the problem. Being able to change the behavior of companies that have been used to doing it a different way, but we are definitely seeing a change. There is definitely we had a large FTSE 100 company call me recently and say, hey, you're the side hustle guys. We want to hire side hustlers. I'm like, well, we don't actually use that terminology and that's not really what we do, but fair enough, right? Cool. But that just shows you that's a CEO at a huge multi-billion dollar company because they're thinking about how do I get the talent I need, especially in the age of Gen AI. Everybody's saying obviously jobs are being replaced. We don't need humans anymore, but that's not the reality, right? And then you can start tapping into different skills, but those skills don't exist. So you could go out and say, hey, I need someone who can do an API for OpenAI. Well, there's not that many people that can do that. So you're not going to hire that full time, but you could tap into somebody to do it in an outcome who's done it at their other company. And I said it's a behavior change, and it's it's definitely a change, but I do think 5 years is my prediction. This will be pretty normal.
Hmm.
We're just at the intersection of it now.
Yeah. So I'm picking up on AI because you said AI is not yet taking away jobs. How is AI impacting human talent though? Because I mean, there's nervousness, there's a kind of an unknown. What is it going to be doing? What's your read on it?
So I always have I always have the opposite opinion of what people think I'm going to do, because we've got, obviously, we have built a company called Gigged.ai. We chose that name before um, the AI gravy train started, and it seemed cool. Now, so we decided to use AI to automate some of the places where there was human error. It's definitely not about replacing people. So again, not to get too technical, but what our platform really does, the AI part is relatively simple. It uses AI to create an outcome-based statement of work. So you can only work on an outcome if the work is qualified well. A lot of companies go wrong qualifying the work, right? It always goes wrong. This happened in recruitment. Humans don't qualify work very well. It depends, could have a bad day. They could just not ask the right question. So you can automate that really easily. So we've automated that. And then we've automated the skill matching. Because it's an outcome, you're matching skill. You're not actually matching culture. Culture doesn't really matter too much when you're trying to work on an outcome.
Yeah.
Culture matters massively when you're trying to build a permanent workforce, but when you're trying to do outcomes, it's not the most important thing. Obviously, you need interpersonal skills, but a person's going to be working with you for a couple of weeks or a couple of months to do a specific piece of work, right? The culture is not as important as we think. Now, and I share that point because we weren't trying to replace recruiters, but what we were trying to do was get the people doing the more high value tasks. And the more high value tasks are building relationships with the customer, being able to deal with disputes and issues as they come along. They're high value tasks. They're things that I wouldn't want a chatbot, dealing with a dispute. I wouldn't want, a chatbot can't go out and have a coffee with somebody and get to know them personally and professionally. They can't do that. But it can definitely help create a better statement of work than a human can. So, and with that risk taken away, they have more time to do the key thing. And I think that is case in point about what we're seeing in Gen AI. People forget 2 years ago, the hot topic was blockchain. Blockchain everywhere, right? Now, and a lot of that was confused with crypto, but what really happened there was blockchain has grown, and some of the companies have turned into multi-billion-dollar companies. But there's not been that many of them because the use cases have been actually lower than they anticipated. That's exactly the same with Gen AI, right? It's came out with this big, and Gen AI is not new. Large language models are not new. How effective they are in the UX of them in terms of how you and me would use them have changed, but it's not new technology. But my prediction is that there will be certain jobs that will be impacted and reduced by this. So there was a report that came out last week. The most impacted job in tech has actually been copywriters. So if you're building a new website or you're building a new product, you would always get the copywriter to make sure that the copy is on sync. There's been a reduction in the amount of demand for copywriters because you could put that through. But however, again, if you're a large company or even a small company like us, yes, we used AI tools to help write a lot of our copy, but I still employed a copywriter for $5,000-$6,000 to review everything before it went live, because even though that helped, you can't replace the quality and the emotion that an expert can do to pick up certain nuances that might not exist. And so I think it will definitely help more high value tasks. Look at a software developer. You can use Copilot now to help you create some lines of code. Data scientists can use it to create some Python scripts now. Does that mean that we're going to see a reduction of software developers and a reduction of data scientists? No. Will we see them focusing more on the qualitative piece of the task? Yes. And I think that is the big thing that companies are wrestling with just now. Go back to that blockchain example. What are the use cases, the proper use cases for generative AI and large language models? Because the AI thing is very confusing. At the end of the day, AI has lots of strands to it. You've got natural language processing, you've got machine learning. None of this is new. I mean,
Yeah.
people are throwing about the AI term a lot. It's actually generative AI they're thinking about, but generative AI is just a tiny part of the big picture. So I said, I think there will be certain jobs that will definitely be reduced. I said copywriting was one. You know, customer support is one that we've seen. We've seen a lot of companies. We've seen some terrible examples as well of companies using large language models. The ones in the US about what was it, giving free cars away and stuff. There's some really bad examples of
Yeah.
of things being implemented. So
Mm.
we're right at the beginning of what are the useful use cases for generative AI, and they will be a lot smaller than we anticipate. And yes, it will have a reduction in some jobs, but overall, the amount of jobs will actually increase. You know, there will be new jobs that will come. If you think in 5 years' time, one of the biggest skills that we're going to need is cybersecurity. So cybersecurity is going to be one of the biggest. Data privacy is going to be one of data ethics. That's you can count the amount of people with data ethics, but data ethics is going to become a big job, right? If you're in university just now and you're doing psychology and ethics, you should move into data because you're going to be, you know, you could have a fractional and a full-time career and retire by the time you're 25 probably with you know, if you go into data ethics, because every company is wrestling with, you know, and even data law, right? You know, if you're a lawyer now, are you going to be needed to review an MSA? Probably not, because it's been proved that ChatGPT can review an MSA
Yep.
better than you can. But when it comes to the ethics and the human impact of how this technology is going to impact copyright, people, you know, it's a can of worms, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, so I definitely don't see this as a reduction. I think one of the interesting things that, you know, kind of clickbaity headline recently was Sam Altman, who's the CEO and co-founder of OpenAI, came out and said, we will soon see in the next 2 years, I think he said, the first billion-dollar company with no employees.
Mhm.
I think that's a bit, I don't disagree with that, but I think it's a bit misleading. And I think that is where we see the combination of large language models and fractional talent coming together. So do you need to build a company with a massive full-time workforce? No. I said we built one of the fastest growing companies in the UK with 12 full-time employees and then about a team of another 30 fractional workers that come on and out as we need them.
Yep.
That's allowed us to keep our costs low and allowed us to grow quick. I do think the days are coming that you could have a team of 1, 2, 3 full-time founders and then building a fractional team of CFOs, CMOs, you know, as well as automating a lot of the workflows through large language models, that actually you could build a really valuable company. But I don't believe that that's not going to be because you're going to automate the whole thing and you don't need people. I think those people are just going to work in a different way.
Yeah. Yeah. This is fascinating. Fascinating. And for the most part, you are projecting a positive spin on the coming wave of AI and what the impact it's
Yeah,
going to
I think
have.
it's a great time. There's obviously there is a concerns, but you know, if you really look at human behavior and you really look at the detail, it's not Armageddon, right? It's not the end of the
Yeah.
world. You know, I know there's a view that like AGI, artificial general intelligence, will take over the world and it'll be Terminator, and yeah, maybe, but I don't think so, right? And we're at a time where people can work in different ways. We've got amazing ways that people can work, as I said, from that island in Scotland or Singapore or wherever, right? You can tap into global workforces and global ways of working, and this technology is just going to help accelerate that change. So I don't see it as the doomsday scenario that is painted by many. As I said, I think the use cases for generative AI will be less. It will be less life changing than what we think. It's not going to be the 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 catalyst for the whole change, but it will be another piece of technology which will make a big difference. And then we've got the next leap, which is quantum computing. That's the next one. 2-3 years, we'll all be talking about quantum computing. We won't be talking about generative AI anymore. We'll be talking about quantum computing. And we'll be talking about how that's going to change the world. And then it'll be something else, and then it'll be something else. And we'll just continue to go through these iterations.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, to play this out and the impact on the fractional workers, if they're going to become a larger and larger proportion of the overall workforce, is that what replaces the kind of social aspect that you get from being a full-time worker in an office where you see the same people, you have your work buddies, you go out for beers after work? Like, what replaces that? Because is that not kind of a downside to it?
Like I think it is a downside if it is something that motivates you. So I think the traditional approach that you're working in an office and the social aspect motivates a lot of people, I think is definitely reducing. Like I said, that doesn't motivate me, never really motivated me, but it does motivate a lot of people, especially those that are early in their career. But what we're seeing is a rise in fractional communities. There's amazing fractional communities out there. Most good platforms have their own community. We have our own community. It's mainly around education and advice. There are independent ones out there. There's a great one in Europe. There's some great ones in the US, and they are communities where people meet up. They meet up to work in certain locations. There's a Scottish company called Desana, which is pretty much you can work from any remote office, right? And a lot of these communities, they meet together and they pick an
Yeah.
office they're going to work in that day, and they'll go and meet. They'll have coffee, they'll have beers, and they'll work together. And I think we're seeing a lot more of those fractional communities. And there is a reason that most companies are investing in a community. They don't charge for it. We don't charge for it. But the reason I'm doing it is you still need, how do people learn from each other? How do people get advice? The biggest thing in our community, people don't tend to meet up that much. But what they do tend, the channel that is used the most is the hashtag advice channel. And advice is always
Right.
asked, hey, I've got this example of this. What would you do here? I've got this customer saying this. What would you do? That's hugely important. So I think those social channels can still exist if that's what you want to do. If you choose to do that, you can still be part of certain communities. There's a marketing community in the UK that we've sponsored a few times. Like that sells out like 400 or 500 people every single time. It's crazy. And that's digital marketers. Most of them are aged between like 18 to 22. None of them work full time. They all are SEO and social media, but they're all freelancers. None of them are
Yeah.
permanent. Some of them
Yeah.
are still at university. I think some of them are still at school, right? But they want a sense of community. So it's called Pretty Little Marketer, and that is a hugely a hugely impactful community. And as I said, there's examples like that all over of communities that are building for those that choose not to do that career. And because I think there's a lot of people that have, we're a lot better at talking about, mental health now. Something that I've been, passionate about and talked a lot about over the years. A lot of social anxiety that comes with an office as well, and comes with that approach. Is that I realised that, even though I've worked in sales and I'm a founder and I'm talking stage every second week. I'm an introvert. I've realized that I'm an absolute introvert, right?
Yeah.
I don't really thrive off social interaction. I'm not great at it.
Yeah.
And I realized that I'm much more effective. Like we have 2 offices. I spend most of my time in this box room because it's where I'm most productive.
Yeah.
I go out and meet people a lot, obviously, but I do, it's trying to go like, where do you do your best work? Where are you at your most happiest and productive? So yeah, I think if that is what motivates you, then there are plenty of communities and options there. If you think about even, we're in Glasgow, we moved into a place called Barclays Eagle Labs, obviously sponsored by Barclays. You pay for it, but it's subsidized. It's not a lot, but there's so many freelancers in there, and we've got as I said, we've got like 12, 13 of us, and we're pretty loud. We're quite a driven bunch, and a lot of people come up to me saying, "Hey, I'm a solo, I'm a freelancer, I work on my own. I just come in and sit up with you guys because I like the vibe, I like the chat, I like the positivity, and because in our floor now there was us." And there was some desks, and now all the desks are full, and they are all solo freelancers because they're just coming in and they want they like the vibe, right? And they like the way they work, and they don't want to work in, they don't want to work in an office. Like my software developer at the moment, he just had a baby recently. Him and his wife were big travelers before, and he's currently working for 3 months, I think 3 or 4 months. He's in Bali. Baby doesn't go to nursery yet. His wife's still in maternity. So they've decided, hey, look, we're going to go out. He's still doing his coding work. He's still working, but he's in Bali. And that's cool. That's that's fine. Why, and if you tried to do that 3-4 years ago, it would have been like, are you crazy? But now it's like, well, you're still doing your work. You're still there. Does it matter to me if you're in Bali or Glasgow? Not really.
So, I mean, I get that. Okay, so people are still looking for community. They're just they're orienting towards different communities.
Yeah.
And your group is fun, apparently. That's awesome.
Can be, yes.
So what about, so I'm just playing devil's advocate here. So what about the other aspect of being around like an office is having a boss, like a long-term boss who's, or should be, invested in your growth and development. Like if you're fractional, don't you have to be so self-directed in terms of, okay, if I want to earn more money, then I'm going to have to learn this and I'm going to have to learn it on my own.
And again, that boss might not always be there, right? And then that change of boss, as we all know, right? A company is not the company, it's really your boss, right? And your boss is your perception of that company. If you have a great boss, you'll think it's a great company. If you've got a terrible boss, you probably won't think it's a great company. So I think that we're seeing people do the best, trying to do both best worlds, right? Work and have their full time, and then building the confidence and the belief that they can then do it on their own when the time is right. So, I would more prescribe to the area that you are, in certain roles, there is definitely a big benefit to being full-time early in your career. I think going freelance from day one is definitely going to have downsides, right? It's not all upside early on in your career. I think that is something to think. I think if I was freelance early in my career, I don't think it would have been the best thing for me at 21, 22. Personally, again, for me personally, I learned a lot from the people around. I got a lot of feedback, not always great feedback, but I learned from a lot of that feedback and that helped me. So I think there's definitely pluses to that.
Yeah.
But like we said at the start of the conversation, most role, the average tenure now of a full-time role is 2.5 years, right? It's not a lot.
Yeah.
So it's like, we're seeing a much bigger transient workforce now in terms of, and I said the layoffs have that, right? So, the chances now that you're going to be able to work somewhere for 2.5 years or more without being impacted by a layoff or something, it's probably a pretty high chance that you're going to be impacted by one of those things. So the chance that you're going to have that long time manager interaction. And there's also the other side. Like, I worked for the same person for nearly 12 years. I learned a ton. If I'd maybe worked for 3 or 4 people in that 12 years, maybe I would have learned some different skills as well. So, I don't think it's a one size fits all. And I think it is about choosing what's right for you at certain points in your life. There's certain people who go, you know what, I'm going to go and take a full-time job and I'm going to do it because I need the security, and that's the way I am, and that's cool, right? There's nothing wrong with that. And as I said, that person then might go, you know what, actually, I'm going to start building a side hustle in the background, and then in 5 years' time, they might actually then go and do it. And I think that's the reality of what we're going to see, is that dipping the toe in the water and trying to have the best of both worlds for a while, and then you can decide what you want to do.
Hello, this is Erica. As a listener to this podcast, you'll know I love deep conversations. So I wanted to share something special with you, something that's been a game changer for me. It's called scenario cards. Now, these aren't just any cards. Each card is a what-if question to help you explore your values, your life, and your choices. I have been through burnout and a massive personal transformation over the last couple of years, and I've used these cards as journal prompts. They've helped me dive so much deeper into understanding myself and finding my compass. I've also used them to spark some of the most thought-provoking discussions I've had with our guests. So I'm thrilled to share that Scenario Cards has partnered with us to offer you an exclusive discount. By using our custom link, you not only get the amazing cards, but you also support our podcast with your purchase. It's a win-win. So why not give it a try? Go to scenariocards.org/Erica. That's ERIKA. And use the code ERICA10 at checkout to get an extra discount on any of their products. You'll also find all of this information in the episode notes. So go ahead, dig a little deeper, because your purpose is waiting to be discovered. So let's go back to your journey, because you've alluded to the fact that mental health is very important to you. You went through burnout yourself. And tell us a bit more about the burnout specifically, because post-COVID, many people are talking about burnout. Many people have experienced burnout, or at least a great desire to reassess their priorities. But you went through this pre-COVID, and I'm wondering, like, what kind of support were you able to get back then?
It's not a particularly uplifting story, to be honest. But yeah, so I was diagnosed with a breakdown in 2018, and the writing was probably in the wall for a while, to be honest. But I didn't see it. So I had, I've always been really ambitious. I've always been really hardworking. And that has always been very much ingrained in me, and that really, especially working in a kind of US growing company, that I thrived in that environment. I really thrived in it, and it suited me down to the ground, and so I kind of grew up in on the high stress, high rewards, high risk. New businesses, new offices, new people, very much an entrepreneurial mindset, right? I always felt like I worked for a multi-billion-dollar startup, right? If I thought there was a good decision to make that would help us grow and I had the business case, I could do it, right? And it was an amazing environment. And I said, I don't have any negativity towards the environment. But when change happened to me, I went through, really, when my daughter was born, my wife has a lot of health issues, which were now diagnosed now, but weren't at the time, so we didn't really know what was going on. So there was a lot of really difficult moments there. My brother has some serious mental health issues at the time. So I had a lot of these things going on, and I was running a business that was growing very, very, very fast, and I was really spending a lot of my time hiding, I suppose, from all the really bad stuff that was going on, and trying to just build a business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Traveling a lot, always on a plane, up every morning at 5:30, in the suit first, in the car or to the airport or whatever, and that was me, and that was my life. And but I did start, to realize that at the age of 33, 38, nearly 39, but at 33, I did start noticing some kind of issues, right? So I became quite negative, quite angry, which is not really something that is in my psyche. I'm not particularly negative, but I could feel that. I could feel my leadership not being. I think empathy was always probably my strongest leadership trait, and leading by the front and leading by example. And I kind of know, results started dropping off, and I gripped the back tighter and tighter and tighter to try and solve those challenges. But at the same time, I'd always had headaches. Like for probably 3 or 4, 5 years, I lived on ibuprofen and paracetamol every day. Again, I thought that was normal. I hardly slept. I lived on a diet of coffee and marble lights, right? I had really bad insomnia. I had really bad body pain, especially my neck and my back. But where I started realizing there was a problem was I developed an crazy pain in my hands, right? Like really like unbelievable pain. And then I started noticing that I had like indents in my hand and that was where I was actually muscle wastage. And my muscle in my left hand, my body was actually reducing. So I thought, right, I need to go to see somebody about this. So I went and seen the doctor, and they said to me, and they actually sent me a letter which my wife opened. I didn't open it, and it was saying, like, we think you have motor neuron disease, right, which was obviously really serious. And thank Lord I didn't, and it's a terrible affliction for anybody that had it. But they said to me, we think you have it, and we need to go through some serious tests, and it's going to take some time. So anyway, started going through the tests, and then they were like, actually, you don't have motor neuron disease. I'm like, great, cool, right, back on it, let's go. But they said, look, come in next Thursday or whenever it was. We want to just do some checks. And I was like, cool. So I went in, and they do these electrodes in your brain. I don't know, like. And then the specialist was a neurologist, and he sat me down and he's like, look, I give you a diagnosis, but I'm going to give you some advice. I said, look, the way you live your life and the way that you think is not normal. Your ability to handle stress is not normal. You have such a high threshold for stress, but what you think is normal is not normal. And he said, you are suffering from acute stress, but you're having, you're probably 24 to 48 hours away from a full mental breakdown that you will never recover from. And unless you make some serious changes to your life now, you ain't gonna survive this. And I can remember at the time thinking, that sounds a bit like bullshit. And I'm like, I'm fine, I'm all right. I was like, I'm all good. So I was like, yeah, cool, no problem, fine. And then I was like, right, cool, I'll take it a bit easier, appreciate it, all good. And then I think it was that night or the day after, I forget the exact events, but I got on a plane to some conference and I was flying back, and I can remember flying back, and for some reason I had tears coming down my face, and I can remember just thinking, I can't do this anymore. Like, I just can't do this anymore. I'm done. And that was when I that's when I had to kind of start talking about it and say, because again, I grew up in an environment. I'm the oldest of four. Grew up in an environment, especially being Scottish and being the oldest of four and being male. you don't, I'm not from an environment of talking about this stuff. And I never ever thought I was suffer from mental health. I was like, that wouldn't happen to me. I'm strong. That would never happen to
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
Again, that was my mindset then. You know, you couldn't, we had people come in and try to talk to me about meditation. I was like, I don't have time for this. Leave me alone. Don't have time for this. Oh crap.
Yeah.
Mumbo jumbo.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that was when, and that's when I kind of was like, you know what, I need to take some time off. Like, was the support network there for me? No. Right. What was it? Did I get a shoulder around me and supported? No. I took 3 weeks off, and when I came back, my job as a leader was no longer there. And that's when I realized, you know what, I'm done. I'm going to go and take some time off. I'm going to leave and go and decide what I want to do in my life. And I'm going to go and spend time with my daughter. Because my daughter was 3 at the time, and I really hadn't seen her. And my wife was dealing with some serious shit that I just wasn't really helping with. And it's like, and it was kind of like, I suppose, just a shift to going, I'm done. And again, it was the best thing that ever happened to me in terms of the what followed from those 5 years since. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Would not be where I am now, physically and mentally, without going through that. But when I look back and reflect on it now, it was particularly dark. But I said I had all the physical aspects. I didn't really have the mental aspects. I wasn't feeling particularly low. I wasn't feeling suicidal. I wasn't feeling like, oh, I'm depressed. I didn't feel any of that. I just felt like, but I said the physical side, like, really started. Like, I was shaking all the time. Like, it was just like, it was dog. Now, again, the and then I said I took some time out. I moved into mixed martial arts. I joined a program called Whip to Warrior, which is a bunch of guys struggling from mental health, training every morning, and that was the most impactful thing I've ever done. I then joined Gartner, which is a really good mindset to that, because I'd said to them, like, I'm going to start sharing about some of this. I'm going to write blogs. I'm going to start sharing. They were like, cool. And I appreciated that. They were great. So I started sharing a lot of it. I've tried to share, I try and make it, it's not a badge of honor. What I try and do is, look, I made a shitload of mistakes. I did not deal with it the way you should deal with it. I done everything you shouldn't do. I didn't talk about it. I didn't try and change anything. I just kept knuckling down, and it nearly broke me. But then, as I said, from there on in, I was able to have a much better appreciation for it. I was able to change pretty much every aspect of what I do. I couldn't, like, going to start a business after going through all of that was definitely scary, but I knew that I had the coping mechanisms now to do it, which I wouldn't have had before. Whether it be meditation, whether it be ice baths, whether it be just, taking better care of yourself. I said, it ain't perfect by any stretch of imagination, but going back to that period in 2018 was particularly dark and particularly difficult, and as I said, but if I hadn't gone through it, and now what I try and do is share, I try and make it a positive and try and talk about, hey, this is what I went through, and this is kind of some of the key aspects, and really here are some of the things that, because once you're in deep burnout, because burnout is often seen as, oh, I'm a bit burnt out, because when they said to me, you're something for burnout, I'm like, all right, and what? But then when he was like, you're actually a bit of a mental breakdown, that's when I was like, it doesn't sound great. And then that was when I was like, right. But as I said, I didn't listen at the time, right? I didn't listen to any of it until it actually hit me like an absolute. It was literally, I remember the moment, it was just literally all of a sudden. And I'm like, what is wrong with me? Why I have tears coming down my face? I'm like, I'm a grown man. I shouldn't be crying in a bloody airplane. But that was when I was like, well, this isn't normal. And as I said, been through those experiences, I did change my environment. I said, I'm not saying it was environment's or anybody's fault. It was my fault. I take full responsibility for it. I let it happen. Nobody let it happen. I let it happen. I take responsibility for it. And now I try to make sure that, that's the culture that I've tried to build in this company, is that we have a burnout avoidance focus, right? So, when it comes to flexible working and mental health support, we want people to avoid burnout. That's my team that I have, I want them to avoid burnout.
Yeah.
And if we focus on avoiding burnout instead of trying to fix burnout, like I noticed, 12 months ago, the dating app, this is a tangent, the dating app Bumble came out and put a big press release saying we're giving a month off because our team are burnout and we're giving them all a month off. Yesterday, they announced that they've just got rid of 47% of their workforce, right? Admitting your team's burnout, you're giving them some time off to admit it, and then cutting them 12 months later is not a good way to avoid burnout. So I think there's a lot of things that we can focus on. But yeah, as I said, I didn't. I was the opposite of open-minded when it came to. I did appreciate mental health. As I said, my brother had some serious mental health issues. I appreciated it, but I never ever. I always had this mentality that I was too strong to. None of these things would ever happen to me. I won't happen to me. Which is obviously a very naive, silly way to look at it. But I think a lot of people probably think like that, right?
Yeah.
So, and like you said, since COVID and things are getting better, absolutely. I said when I went through it in the environment I went through, I was the first person to really, in a senior leadership role, to admit that I'm struggling. And I said, was it dealt with in the right way? No. But I don't blame that. I said, would it be different now? Probably.
Wow. I mean, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that whole story, because it's really powerful. Like not holding back and sharing all that, the struggle you went through there. And especially as, like you said, as a Scottish guy who, in culturally, this is it's a big thing for somebody to talk openly about it. It's one thing I think for even women to talk about. We talk about burnout. Maybe we're much more empathic when it comes to that type of conversation and understanding of it. But I think for a guy like you to talk about that as well. And the thing I'm really picking up on is the kind of the high level of executive function that some people can still display when underneath they are going through absolute turmoil. And like you said, like you're still functioning, you're still running a team, you're still like, okay, you're a little bit, your temper's a bit shorter, but you're still outputting, right? And everything. And it's so hard to, I think, when you have coworkers or when you have other people, and you really have to dig a little bit deeper, because if you're like, how's it going, man? And he's like, yeah, I'm fine. Everything's fine. You just still, sometimes you got to like, okay, really, like, how are you? Because people will hide it.
Yeah. And I think there's picking up. I said the biggest thing I've learned, I've obviously learned a lot about burnout since then, and I've talked a lot about it, and I've read a lot about it, and I've talked to a lot of experts about it. What I went through is not that rare, right? So I went through the physical aspects, and I think it is, if someone is I went through this with my co-founder a couple of years ago. Somebody's not necessarily taking days off sick, but have some sort, there's a good chance that some of those issues are actually indicators of burnout. And like my issues were chronic headaches, insomnia, obviously the hand and body pain. The biggest one was really the stomach pain was my biggest one. So I for as long as I can remember, probably since my early 20s, I'd been tested for ulcers and everything else. I always had real stomach issues. I don't have any. So all those issues I don't have any of them anymore. Not one of them. None of them exist with me anymore. And I grew up with these things, like the the headaches, with my co-founder, that was one of the things I realized. We were going through a big funding round 12 months ago. We were going through a big build, and I'd noticed there was a few changes in his um, um, sleeping patterns. We use a thing called a whoop strap, and we've got a group, and I was kind of noticing there was some real changes in his sleeping patterns and his recovery. And I don't, and I'm not saying use a whoop strap to monitor people, but we just done it as fun as a group. There's 4 or 5 of us, but I did notice there was a real change in his sleeping, because he'd always be recovered. We'd always joke about it, like, man, you sleep like a baby.
Yeah.
And then his sleeping and recovery started, and then I was like, actually, I was able to look. I think you're showing the first signs of burnout. And then once we got into it, we actually got into it that was carrying a lot more stress and pressure than was being let on. There was a view of, hey, look, I'm a CTO, I need to have this. I'm good. I'm like, well, yeah, but you're displaying the behaviors that I displayed back in 2018. Like, I'm the hero, I'm the top of the ship. I can't show weakness. Vulnerability is a weakness, not a strength. And I'm all good. Again, that will break at some point. That will come back and bite you in the backside. And I said, I think that is where I think leaders can have, try and have that awareness, and a little bit of, because a lot of the time people won't realize that they're suffering from burnout. I said, I did not realize until, again, it wasn't even sitting in an office with a neurologist didn't make me realize. Him saying, you have this, and I was like, all good, I'm fine. And I said, until I was like, until it kind of hit me, and maybe it was just processing it, I don't know, whatever it was, but it was, whatever it was, it hit me. And whether it's because he said, hey, like 2 or 3 days, you're going to have and I don't know whether that was just subconscious, I don't know. But I think, we can have more awareness. There's a great graphic, I share it every now and again on LinkedIn, but there's a great graphic of the kind of 9 steps of burnout, and steps 2 or 3 you can kind of check, but once you're down to 8, 9, it's a tough road to get back from. It's not as simple as, hey, I'm a little bit burnt out, I'm going to go and take a week off in the sun. It's not as easy as that.
And it's probably, it's not a 2-week holiday that's gonna cure you. And as you get further and further down, it's harder and harder to self-diagnose, because I think you're so deep into it. Stuff is normalized that should not be normalized.
Yeah, you don't have the self-awareness, and that's, I think, the biggest thing that I have now. Like, does burnout go away? No. Like I said, I had a few weeks ago, I know I was getting the back too tight. I knew I was going to a place that wasn't good.
Yeah.
But I did notice it. And I was like, and I did notice it, and I knew I need to delegate some things. I need to tell some people I appreciate them, and I need to get out of the way a bit. I just need to get out of the way a bit, and you go and, during, like, one of the things that I do personally now is I try and steal time, is what I call it. So, like, I get up in the morning, meditate, take my daughter to school, and I go to CrossFit by 9 o'clock to 10. I won't look at an email or log in usually until about half 10. But that way I start my day and then when I realise, hey, I'm not training, I'm going, drop my daughter to school, and then I'm going straight to the office or straight home to jump in a call, then I'm going on another call and another call, and then it's like, all of a sudden, 2-3 weeks go by, and you've lived, and then it's like, whoa, wait a minute. So it's like, right, actually, it's about trying to take take time and do things like, I don't do ice baths every day, but an ice bath is I call it, in case of emergency, break glass thing for me. So see, if I'm if I feel like I'm really in a bad place, I will go and get in an ice bath for 2 to 3 minutes. I will meditate I usually meditate for 10 minutes every day, but if I'm really bad, I know that if I meditate for more than that, I know that I kind of need to do that. And I know I need to do that consistently for a couple of days to try and break the cycle. and as I said, saying no to meetings and saying no to things. I used to say yes to everything. Like, hey, you need to speak at this event tomorrow. You need to do this. I used to say yes to everything, and I noticed even 2 weeks ago. And again, my co-founder checked me on this. He said, "You're doing 3 events today. Right? You're going to a big meeting with a pitch with a customer. You're doing another pitch in the afternoon, and then you're running an event and start to finish." He's like, "When are you getting any time to do anything?" I'm like, "Well, I'm not." Because he's like, "Well, but crazy. We've got a team of people who want more responsibility. What are you doing?" Again, and that is really important. And I said I never had that before. I think having people there that have been through burnout and been through it, that can check you and that can be your mirror at times. Because yeah, you're right, like what you said, it is very hard to self-diagnose you. It is very hard to be your mirror, especially when you're deep in it. Like I think it's nearly impossible to do it on your own.
Yeah.
I was lucky that, I kind of, a lot of them are now some of my best friends, but I kind of instilled a team of people around me. So I got my MMA coach, Dean, one of my best friends now, to help coach me around the MMA. Jim, who was a coach of Wim Hof, to help me with how to do the ice baths properly, how to breathe properly, how to do box breathing, all these things that I always laughed at. I also went to done some other things. I went to Japan and done like, purpose stuff with like Buddhist monks. Some of the things was a bit out there, but some of it then has created and I said all this stuff now is like the trendy hipster stuff to do, like ice bath every day. But I said I did start to find that these things actually do help. I said I don't use Instagram, I don't use Facebook, I don't post every day that I'm in an ice bath. But some of these things do, for me, they really helped. And that was another thing I done as well. I did come off. I said I use LinkedIn for career development, but I came off all social media about 4 years ago, and because I realised that one of the big things that I had, especially in my career, especially in a career as executives, competing with each other to get the top job, a bit like Succession. I realised that comparison is the thief of joy, right? And I was always comparing myself. I could never celebrate anybody's success. They had a Range Rover, I need a better Range Rover. They've just been promoted to, X salary, well, I need to do more. They just hit that target, well, I need to do better. And that was the executive kind of journey I was in. And then now you're like, and even, connected to all these people in social media, and you're like, oh, they've just got that car, they've got that house, they've just been on holiday. None of it matters, right? It's just all stuff. It doesn't matter. But, you can get into this whole, comparison, comparing yourself to people. And, that's the one, if there's one lesson I try and teach my daughter, it's that, right? I try and talk, about that comparing yourself, especially little girls who compare themselves to each other. And it's like, that the comparison, that was probably what started my burnout journey, was comparing myself to everybody. Like I could not be, any of my peers, if they achieved something, I was not happy for them. Genuinely was not happy for them. Like that would create a fire in me, and I needed better. And I said, I don't have that anymore. I've tried, especially in the startup community, we try to create a community of people and founders that are happy for each other, help each other, celebrate success. But that was a really difficult one for me. Like really difficult to reprogram that in your brain.
Hell of a journey. I mean, and that's, you're highlighting one of the big, I think, the big differences between corporate and startup communities is there's almost a I would liken it to like more of a culture of scarcity within a corporate, because there's only a certain number of top roles, and if everybody's kind of trying to ascend and fight for those roles, there's not abundance, there's scarcity. There's a zero-sum type of element to it. Whereas in a startup community, everybody's kind of building something different, and you may be competing for funding or competing for something, but at the end of the day, it's like people taking their own ideas and try to build something, and you kind of want to say like, oh, hell yeah, like that's a cool thing, you want to support, and that's such a huge difference.
I was strangely inspired. It was a strange, being into MMA. again, not everybody's cup of tea, but I listened to the Joe Rogan podcast on a lot of the MMA ones. I heard them talking about, and this was actually changed my mindset on it, believe it or not, was he's a comedian, right? Well, known for being a podcaster and for being an MMA, but really as a comedian. And he talked a lot about how historically the comedy club that they were in the US, it was a very negative environment. They'd all compete with each other. They would all try and go for the same gigs. And then when the internet came and the podcast came and the market became much bigger, they actually created a community and they stopped competing with each other and he kind of created this. And that's what I thought. That's kind of what I always, that kind of what changed my mindset was that whole, yeah, of course comedians compete with each other, but actually, because they're on the same gig or but actually, when you create a group of them that actually are there to make each other better, the market and the demand for that is actually now bigger than it ever has been. And that's the mindset we've tried to have around the startup culture, is that, that's what we've tried to do in Scotland. We're trying to make Scotland historically has not been, and even Edinburgh has been, but Glasgow has not been known for a startup culture. It has not been known. So what we've tried to do is create a community in Glasgow that creates that by helping each other, by bringing people on podcasts, by doing collaborations between each other, just anything we can do to help, give a leg up. My skills are different from a founder somewhere else. My network is different from their network. Then, so we've been able to tap into different ways. But that's probably been one of the biggest things that actually helps me avoid burnout now, is because I'm not continually being triggered by social media or being triggered by, those huge, unhelpful comparisons. I'm just trying to be me, right? I'm just trying to do it. I'm just trying to stay healthy, try and grow a business as well as I can. I'm not scared of failure anymore. I used to be absolutely petrified of failure. Technically you could say when I left after 12 years and how I left, you could say I failed. I don't look at it that way, right? But I think at the time I probably did feel that way. And I now have a much healthier idea of, failure. And I said not as scared by it as I used to be.
And you have a podcast called First Time Founders. Is that part of your initiative to connect with other founders?
Not even connect. What I was trying to do with it was I started it pretty much the day we started the company. And I actually started it with the view of trying to bring burnout and mental health to the fore with founders. Because one of the things I realized was, even at Gartner, I started noticing that the burnout, especially with a lot of execs I work with, a lot of them talk to me about, like, I was working with CEOs and CIOs, and they would be like, hey, I actually really found that blog interesting, and they would talk to me about that, and I realised that people were much more open in talking about it. But then what I noticed was in the startup culture, especially venture-backed firm, people are scared to admit around burnout and mental health because they don't want to show weakness, because they feel if they show weakness, the funding will be pulled, which again is not the reality. But so I decided that I would try and use the podcast to talk to founders around, around building the company, but in the early days, right? About the financial pressures, the how you need to sometimes, work a full-time job while you're doing it, the side hustle aspect, how you need to, how do you actually save up? How do you actually start it? How do you actually build a plan? But then how do you deal with the unbelievable stress and pressure that it is starting a company? Because, starting a company, especially during, COVID, is what, one of the most difficult thing I've ever done. So I wanted to bring more awareness around that, and some of the journeys and some of the openness that people have shared. One of the most, I think, open one that I've had was, there's a guy who I know pretty well. Always kind of viewed him as quite a get shit done guy, very like quite gruff, I would say, a bit like me, but like, comes from a similar area, similar background to me as well. Actually, he sold his built a huge company, sold it for, well over 100 million. So you would think, like, well, it's great. I actually noticed a lot of the exited founders were the ones that actually needed support after it. They actually, the burnout hit them after, because they went from building it, they exited it, and then their purpose was low. They'd actually realised they were really struggling with burnout during the whole thing. And then one of them shared a great example around, hey, I went, I've got a therapist, and again, this is the last person on earth I would expect to go into a therapy conversation. Yeah. It took me by surprise. But again, just how open he was, right? A male, mid-40s, saying, look, I went through this and gone through it. It was the most miserable time in my life. Yeah, the result and the output look great and it looks like a fairy tale, but for me personally, I've struggled with it. I go to therapy 3 times a week. Here's what I've learned. And you were like, wow, right? And that's amazing. I don't think you would have seen that from someone like him a few years ago. So yeah, we tried to use the podcast very much to really talk about the subjects that most of the startup podcast, a lot of them talk about product market fit and they talk about funding. They don't actually talk about, how do you go and have a conversation with your spouse around, hey, look, we're not going to have an income for 2 years. How are we going to deal with that? How do you deal with your first hire when your co-founder quits and you're standing alone with no money in the bank? How do you deal with that? How do you build a culture when you're trying to build a team from scratch, but you have no money? So try and talk about a lot of the taboo subjects that don't really get talked about much.
It's such a service. I mean, to people to know that they're not the only ones struggling as well.
Yeah. Look, everyone's struggling in some way, and I think the more that we can share different coping mechanisms and share different advice, the better, right? And again, that's what we've tried to do with the podcast, try to do a lot of the posts that we put out. It's just to try and be honest. Again, it's not about gaining attention. It's not about you're using the mental health as a badge of honor, but it is trying to educate people around, especially the signs. I think just watching out for those signs is the key thing. As I said, I'm very thankful and blessed that I didn't have motor neuron disease, but without those symptoms and those finally being diagnosed, I wouldn't have, I would never had any idea that was mental health related, right? It was like they're physical. Why are they? I'd never ever thought that was a thing.
Most people don't. The same thing. It's only over the past couple of years I've learned about like somatic responses to stress and everything. And like stress can show up in many different ways in a physical way. But I think I'm a bit similar to you in that I always thought I could just think my way out of problems and be like, okay, but like logically this doesn't make sense. Logically I can answer these emails at 3 a.m. I can function. I can do all this. Like it's not. Yeah, it's self-delusion, really.
Yeah. It's not getting to the root cause. And as I said, like now, and this is the thing that again does fascinate me. My wife was saying it the other day, like literally, so I think I weigh 20 kilos more than I did in 2018.
Mm.
I don't have the shakes anymore. I don't have the hand pain. I don't have the neck or back pain. Again, I had to do a lot of physio and a lot of different things to do it. It was a long journey.
Yeah.
Don't have the stomach pain. I don't literally all of those symptoms. I don't have any of them anymore. And I had a lot of those symptoms for 10 plus years. I honestly just thought it was normal. And I don't have, now if I took a painkiller, it would be kind of like, oh wow, I'm very rare that I would ever, I literally used to live on in my car. It would be full of ibuprofen and paracetamol and Rennie and IBS tablets, peppermint tablets. So I would literally live on those things now I don't touch them. And again, and that was through a combination of, again, the meditation, the ice baths, the exercising a lot more, you know, the changes in diet. You know, I changed a lot of diet. You know, I kind of got tested for a lot of things and realized I was allergic to a lot of things. You know, like just kind of things that I would never have if I was on the, you know, if I was on the kind of the exec merry-go-round, I would probably never have done those things. But it was when I took the time out and I wasn't working, I literally like every day I would go to the MMA gym at 6 a.m., then go to the physio. I would then go got tested for various stuff, you know, got blood tests, you know, and that's just when you actually realize the physical. So, you know, I got tested for everything, and it could see how high my stress levels through my blood work. And then recently I got, and you could see the actual difference from in you know in a lot of the stress indicators in my blood work. It was like I always thought it was just again mental, but physically, you could see from 2018 to 2023 when I got the last one done, the difference in the markers were night and day. Like it's of the and the cortisol levels, right? Levels, and
Yeah.
it you know actually a massive reduction, and that's when you see it actually from a health professional. You see the difference. You're like, whoa, that's like
It's
crazy.
real. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That inflammation that all the cortisol causes and everything is eliminated.
Inflammation was one of the biggest things I think I learned
Yeah.
about, you know,
Yeah.
and kind of started on turmeric and again that's what the ice baths do help reduce inflammation. And I think a lot of the hand pain and stuff was inflammation, right? I think you know the muscle wastage and stuff. It was inflammation, and it was just my body dealing with these things over time. Because if I was negotiating a big deal, which I was regularly, you know, don't know if you've ever seen the episode of Friends, right? When Phoebe is an investment banker and she's smoking like mad before it and after. That was me, right? I don't smoke anymore, but like that would be me when I'm marble light. Before the deal, I'd be smoking, and after I'd be smoking. You know, that would be how I would deal with the you know stress. But now, if you just breathe through your nose and out through your mouth, and actually breathe properly, which I never knew how to do, then actually that whole I need a cigarette because the stress that's actually a physical reaction to the stress, right? It's not,
Yeah.
you know, you can that is your body, the fight or flight mode. You know, I used to realize if I was going into a big meeting with a big customer, you know, I can remember being outside RBS one day and I was shaking. The minute I went into that meeting and shook the person's hand, I stopped shaking. And the minute I got out, I started shaking again. You know, that's the fight or flight, and that was the, you know, whatever the cortisol was doing in my body, that was all of that. And you know, you think, man, that's physical, that's real, right? It's not. But again, it wasn't until after the fact. At the time, I just think I shake before meetings. You know,
Yeah.
don't shake before meetings anymore. But I also just thought that was like, I just thought that was me. Like I just thought that's what I'm like. I have, you know, that's just me. I have, but then again, being able to get off the train and take some time to get off and actually observe and speak to people that know what they're talking about and actually educate yourself in it, you actually realize that actually that's not just me. That's not normal.
Yeah.
That is the impacts of stress, and actually, I can deal with it in a different way. And again, it's not. I don't think there's an easy route out if you can start to prioritize it and about changing priorities. So for me, I realized that, you know, and this sounds really selfish when I say it, but I realized, and I can remember it was Jim, the breathing and ice work coach, said to me, he's like, your number one priority needs to be your health. Your number one priority needs to be your physical and mental health. Your second priority needs to be your family. Your third priority might be some sort of career and work environment, but it should not be number one or number two. And I had ingrained this whole, like, I am a provider. My career is number one. If I provide by that and I earn a lot of money, I'm able to give my family a great life and the house and all that stuff. and the holidays and all that stuff, and that is me providing, and that is me doing a good job, and that they'll and actually when you think about it, what a load of nonsense, right? Again, if I hadn't made it and I had, had a proper breakdown or whatever, then, you know, my daughter going to a nice school and growing up in a nice house every day isn't any good if her dad's had a mental breakdown, right?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point?
Yeah.
Um, but you do, and it took me a long time to realize that, and I suppose try and make up for it. Right, I'm very conscious of it now. She was too young; she doesn't really remember it now, but I remember it. Right, I'm kind of very conscious that for 3 years, what a terrible guy, right? A terrible father, not there, present, right? It's same for my wife. My wife should have divorced me, right? There was no, um, there was apart from providing the material aspects that a high function executive, the trappings of it is, you'll earn a decent amount of money and you'll have a decent house and all that kind of stuff. But all the other stuff, right? The really important stuff, that stuff wasn't there. So, it was, and this is I try and make up for it now. And it does mean, especially with a startup, there are a lot of financial um, sacrifices you need to make. Don't go on those holidays like we used to. And we don't have the dispensable income we used to, because building a company from scratch is really, really tough financially. But we've never been happier, right? We've never been happier because, I'm doing what I want to do. I feel empowered. I'm physically and emotionally been able to spend much better time with my wife and my daughter. And there is much more happiness there. Do we have as much money in the bank? No, we don't. But hey, we're 100 times happier. So, yeah. So it was. If you told me that 5 years ago, I'd have laughed at you and walked away.
Like you said, it's the lesson you learned from the horrible experience you went through with the burnout that's taught you all this. And I mean, I'm grateful for that doctor who sat you down and said, "Look, buddy, you have like 24 hours," because it triggered that change in you. I mean, you're here today as a CEO of a company, building your own business, building business that impacts a lot of other people. Better relationship with your family. Like it's just what you're exuding right now is like, a sense of gratitude. I'm happy with what I have, that I'm in a position where I can explore all these great intellectual things that I'm interested in, and have these relationships and everything. It sounds very powerful coming from you as well. Being a guy from Scotland saying it, because I think so many other men especially need to hear it from a guy like you.
Yeah, and I said I was that guy, right? As I said, if we did have, I can remember it well. We had a mindfulness expert come into us once in the exec and ask us all to lie down and do breathe work during a board meeting. And I said, "Are you joking? Got a board meeting to run." Now that probably wasn't the right environment. It probably wasn't teed up in the right way. I think you got to be careful not to. One of the things I've realised, you can't push meditation on people. You can't push any of these things on people. You can't do it. You need to find it yourself, and you need to understand it yourself. You can't push it. You really can't. But I think when you realize that there is no other option, again, I got to the stage where there's no other option, right? I said I was given, antidepressants. I think it was diazepam or something I was given, and I just put it in the bin, right? I was like, I ain't going down this route, right? I'm not going to go down. And I know a lot of people go down that route, but for me, I'm like, this isn't going to mask. This isn't going to get to the root of the problem.
Yeah.
I need to understand that I am the root of the problem, and that's why I've been very conscious. There's no blame. Like, I've got to a place where I am grateful for what I went through, grateful for where I'm now, but there is no blame on anybody. I think you can kind of. I've had people say to me, "Yeah, you could sue, you could do that." You know what? You could go down that route. You could go down that route. I decided that I wanted to forgive anybody that was involved. I also wanted to give myself some forgiveness, because I said I wasn't near the end. I wasn't the leader that I should be. I was definitely making bad decisions that were impacting people's mental health as well, I'm sure, right? And I wasn't proud of the leader I was becoming. So, you know, so you know, so but I think you do need to forgive yourself, you need to forgive everybody that's around you, and then just try and move on with it.
Yeah. Powerful words. I mean, with everything you've gone through, if you were to give, if you were to address a graduating class, right? You know, people just entering the workforce, what would you tell them?
I would tell them to I would tell them I would tell them some of my story, and I would be I would tell them to just be very careful of getting onto the career train and just thinking that your success as a person is defined by your success in going up a corporate ladder. That doesn't define you, doesn't define you as a person, doesn't define the man or woman you're going to be. I think being very open minded. I used to look at a career as as I said, a ladder, but now I try and look at it as a chapter of a book, right? You can have you have different chapters. That chapter can be totally different. That chapter might be scary, it might be uplifting, that might be, you have different chapters, and now you could go from being a CEO, like whatever happens next, I am going to do a more of a fractional career next. I've realised I like working with lots of I'm going to hopefully go work with startups more. That's what I want to do. Go and do a fractional career and help startups from some of the things that I've learned from corporate, because there's a lot of good things you learn in corporate around building and managing a business. Operationally, the things you learn are amazing that really can be applied to a startup. So, that's where I'll go next. I'd probably like to do a bit more in the burnout phase, do more talks about it, maybe write a bit more about it. That's kind of where I'd like to go. So yeah, I would definitely share my experience, but also realize about the priorities, right? The health, the family and the work, and try and not be one that their career in that job doesn't define you, and are different places and different turns you can go.
Yeah.
That whole career ladder and that whole way that we've been brought up to think about how we work is really not is not pre-described anymore. You can choose what you want to do. So give it some time, think about it, map it out. Don't just jump into the first job you're offered and just try and move up that because that's the way you think. Really do give it some time and some thought.
Wise advice. Wise advice. And yeah, looking forward to whatever you're doing next. I mean, you threw some stuff out there. I'd be interested in to see what's next from you.
Yeah, I think the moment definitely, we're in scaling mode, which is really exciting in the company. But I've been open and honest. This was never a long term. I think for everybody's good. We are trying to build something. I would imagine that this will then become part of a larger company as we scale it. I don't see this for me as being like a 10-year gig. I think we'll take this to a certain level, hopefully a successful level, but we'll do the best we can. And then I've always seen, I've always seen I'll go and do something again, something around working mainly with founders, because I've enjoyed that a lot, and I've kind of hopefully I've got something from what we've done in a short period of time. I've hopefully can instill some of that experience around around fundraising, around building a culture, around how you actually do it. Hopefully, and as I said, I don't know exactly what, but I definitely want to do more work within that mental health. Again, I'm not a therapist. I am not an expert in it by any stretch of the imagination. You don't want me coaching you if you're going through burnout, but I think what I can hopefully do is continue to share some of my experience, and that's I definitely want to continue to do that.
Thank you so much. I mean, what you shared today is just I'm blown away. I'm really blown away, Rich. Thank you so
I
much
appreciate you
for
giving me the time to talk about it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. If you enjoy this episode, don't forget to subscribe.